The generational trauma of House Hightower is on full display throughout the brutal tragedy of Jaehaerys Targaryen's death. And although Daemon, Blood, and Cheese are the only people who can truly be called responsible for what happened to Jaehaerys, it's obvious that every one of the Greens blames themselves for their own reasons. And it's not hard to see where their internal sense of culpability actually comes from. In the wake of the death of Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen, one of the most telling aspects of how the Hightowers come to grips with the brutal loss is the way in which their coping has absolutely nothing to do with each other. And although Alicent and Aemond are the only people who seemingly acknowledge their own sense of guilt when it comes to Jaehaerys' death, a great deal of the Greens' inability to comfort one another in the aftermath seems to be driven by their personal sense of guilt and the attribution of guilt to each other. Aegon's reaction is the most fierce, and in some ways it's the most interesting. His desire to enact violent vengeance on anyone that he can find who is responsible for Jaehaerys is the driving force behind his actions in the immediate aftermath. But the intensity of his emotions is somewhat unexpected. Aegon doesn't come across as a particularly involved father, and he hasn't demonstrated any particular emotional engagement with anyone in his family, or anyone in the world for that matter. But when his son is killed, he absolutely explodes with rage, and it's undeniable that he cared a great deal about Jaehaerys. Aegon is an interesting character because, although he is an entitled and disconnected brat, he has also gone out of his way to disengage from what so many people have said was his duty and his destiny. Viserys' rejection of him in favor of Rhaenyra, despite the fact that he was the male heir that Viserys killed his first wife for, obviously affected Aegon's perception of himself. But his lack of acknowledgement that he could even possibly become king until the moment it happened seems intentional. Aegon's ascension to the throne is also extremely unique, because he is a king who was never an heir, at least in the eyes of the king who came before him. Despite the fact that Viserys expected Rhaenyra to follow in his footsteps, the threat of Rhaenyra's reign has always loomed large over Aegon, because his mere existence poses a threat to her reign. So then, for Aegon to take the throne but to then see the ultimate price that he was always told posed a danger to him, visited on his toddler son instead, must have been beyond traumatic. He understandably lashes out at the people around him, but he's also caught in between his lifelong genuine desire to not be the king, and the now seemingly proven reality that everyone was telling him the truth all along. He could either take the Iron Throne or die. In the aftermath of Jaehaerys' murder, we really see Aegon proclaim himself as the king with his full chest for the first time. And he calls Jaehaerys his heir and legacy in the present tense despite what just happened. But literally up until the night of the killing, Aegon was clearly not taking his new role or the real danger of this situation seriously. So it's interesting that he lashes out at Otto and Sir Criston and completely avoids emotionally connecting with Helaena. Because it's hard to imagine that he doesn't feel any guilt or irresponsibility for ignoring or underplaying the lifetime of warnings he's gotten regarding the danger he was in. He doesn't even attempt to emotionally connect with anyone besides his mother. And Alicent in turn rejects him, because she is in many ways as emotionally stunted as he is. And because she is trying and failing to deal with her own feelings of guilt around Jaehaerys. Aegon somewhat justifiably calls Alicent out for arguing in favor of Rhaenyra's survival, but he also clearly reaches out to her for comfort multiple times. Firstly at the council meeting and once again when he breaks down. However, Alicent does nothing to alleviate his pain, both because of how she traditionally handles trauma and because of her own misplaced sense of guilt for what's happened. As we've seen throughout Alicent's character arc, she dissociates when she's dealing with something unbearable, and it doesn't seem like she has developed any other coping skills throughout her life, so she's terribly ill-equipped to give Aegon what he needs right now. But as we see in other moments, she clearly cares and is devastated by the impact of Jaehaerys' death. She's just incapable of offering that emotional connection to the people who need it the most at that moment, Aegon and Helaena. Ironically, when Helaena is absent, Alicent is able to express her pain at what her daughter is going through. But in Helena's presence, she essentially tells her daughter that she needs to block out and ignore the pain for the sake of their duties. Beyond Alicent's emotional limitations, it's obvious that she believes, however irrationally, that her newfound relationship with Criston Cole is the karmic cause for her grandson's death. The psychological damage that Alicent has sustained throughout her marriage with Viserys is not small, and she has seemingly rationalized her suffering away by telling herself that she is doing what she must do, and playing her role for the sake of others. So, it's unfortunate but not surprising that she would associate her finally breaking the rules with the horrific murder of Jaehaerys. Alicent has never had an easy time connecting with Aegon emotionally, but it seems like her complete inability or unwillingness to be there for him as a mother isn't driven by her lack of care or even her lack of capacity to handle something of this magnitude, but rather because she is holding herself personally responsible for the tragedy and is unable to vocalize her guilt. It's no coincidence that she goes directly from trying to confess her perceived sins to Otto, to then walking away from the devastated Aegon. In that sense, it's not hard to see where Alicent learned her coping skills from. Otto plays a fascinating role in the aftermath of Jaehaerys' death as well, because he completely redirects any potential pain he might be feeling into political machinations. He hasn't been an emotionally available character at all throughout his story arc thus far, but we finally see him exhibit some kind of passion in his confrontation with Aegon. However, I don't think that his unavailability denotes a genuine lack of care. We see him occasionally connect with Alicent in a sincere way. He clearly loves Helaena, and ironically, he seems to have the most open affection for Jaehaerys Targaryen. Just as Aegon lashes out at him, Otto volleys that aggression right back toward Aegon. And shockingly, he laments Aegon's dissimilarity from his father. And it's really interesting, because although in some senses Otto is the most realistic member of the Hightower faction, in other ways he seems to be intentionally borderline delusional. In the immediate aftermath of Jaehaerys' murder, he goes into political spin mode, but it doesn't seem like he's doing that because he doesn't care. Rather, it seems like he's retreating to the social construct where he's most comfortable, and where he more importantly doesn't have to fully face the reality that his great-grandson was just killed. And that, from his point of view, he bears some responsibility for that. Otto hasn't just been the driving force behind the machinations of the Greens for the past decades. He has largely been the architect of Westeros' political landscape as it stands now. So, to mastermind this situation for years, only for his great-grandson to be brutally slaughtered in the Red Keep, has got to have him rattled and questioning many of the choices that he's made. Ironically, he wishes that Aegon had only been more like Viserys, despite the fact that no single person is more responsible for the current situation than Viserys is. Plenty of Otto's decisions could have influenced this moment, but nothing mattered more than the reality he's still unwilling to acknowledge. He simply bet on the wrong horse. Had Viserys not indulged Daemon or Rhaenyra, had he been a stronger and more decisive king, or had he just heeded Otto's advice, the Dance of the Dragons likely wouldn't have happened at all. But, when the world of the Greens is completely rocked, instead of confronting the truth, Otto clings to his notions of propriety and societal expectations. He does what he knows how to do and spins PR out of this horror. And he tries to reassure himself that if he were dealing with someone who was just as reliable and predictable as Viserys, it would all be okay. Of course, this couldn't be further from the truth, but coming to grips with the fact that the man he served and loved for decades put his family in mortal danger and protected someone so brutal that even Otto couldn't have predicted his ultimate moves is something he cannot do. And the price of pushing that reality away is the ability to genuinely be there for his family as a parent and grandparent rather than publicist. On a surface level, Otto reflexively becomes what he believes that his family needs him to be, but as demonstrated by his firing and Alicent's failed attempt to confess to him, his compulsion to ignore what he can't handle prevents him from doing what his family truly needs. it certainly doesn't help that Alicent was doubly rebuked when it came to unburdening herself of her imagined sins. It's interesting that Alicent's most intense emotional outburst in the wake of Jaehaerys' death is about what Helaena must be feeling. And yet, when she tries to voice herself to Helaena about Sir Criston, she seems to take Helena's conversational redirection as rejection. Then, when Helaena resists the idea of letting the world in on her grief over her son, Alicent essentially advises her to do what Alicent has always done: to push it down and get it over with for the sake of others. She's not necessarily unkind in her presentation of this, but it's interesting and telling that she can't show her real feelings about Helaena to Helaena herself. And, given that Helaena is neurodivergent and can literally see the future, it's more than understandable that her reaction to Jaehaerys' murder differs from the rest of her family. But she was the witness to the crime and the one who ultimately pointed out her son to blood and cheese. She likely knew what was coming and knew that she had no means of stopping it, but her inability to really communicate with her family, and the reality that she alone was involved with the murder of her son, must have been incredibly isolating. Although people often deride Alicent for her failings as a parent, it's incredibly telling that, in the immediate aftermath of Helena's own son's beheading, she fled to her mother's room for safety. Following the death of Jaehaerys, Alicent does seemingly try to be strong for Helaena specifically, but that comes at the expense of connecting to Helaena emotionally. And she's not the only one. The only other person that Helaena nearly connects with in the wake of the killing is, surprisingly, Aegon. But after a brief moment where it seems like something might happen, Aegon walks away. It'd be easy to read this as another instance of Aegon not understanding Helaena, but he's really the only one who can come close to understanding her in this moment. However, instead of even giving Helaena the opportunity to express herself, he leaves. He has spent most of his time exploding with rage and heartbreak, followed by an attempt to pull himself together. And it seems like his rejection of Helaena is driven more by his internal conflict than his feelings about her. At that moment, he is dealing with the fact that he just killed someone, likely for the first time, in an incredibly brutal way because they murdered his baby. But from someone with Helena's perspective, it'd be easy for her to imagine that he is ignoring her because he holds her at least partially responsible for the death of Jaehaerys. The only person who seems more isolated from the rest of the family than Helaena at that moment is Aemond, who doesn't seek out anyone aside from the brothel madam in the aftermath of the killing. Aemond's reaction in this circumstance is meaningful, because unlike Aegon and Helaena, he has actually shown interest in the goings-on of his family in the past. He appears to have a good relationship with his mother. He seems to be the closest to Sir Criston out of any of Alicent's children, and Otto at least acts as if he has a level of respect for Aemond that he certainly doesn't hold for Aegon. And, despite their poor relationship on the surface, Aegon also sees Aemond as his most loyal kin. So from that perspective, his complete and total absence after Jaehaerys' death is a bit puzzling. Aemond is also in a unique position because, while every one of the Greens seems to blame themselves and feel guilty about the murder, Aemond knows for a fact that he was Daemon's intended target. Not only did he draw first blood when Vhagar devoured Lucerys and Arrax, but he was Blood and Cheese's original assignment that they only moved on from because Aemond wasn't there when they went looking, as he accurately surmised when he was following their trail through the castle. Clearly, that doesn't make him somehow personally responsible for what happened to Jaehaerys, but his outward lack of guilty feelings, or an emotional reaction in general, is interesting in contrast to the rest of his family, who all seem to be observably falling apart in one way or another. His visit to and interaction with the madam on the Street of Silk is subtly telling, though, as he appears to have sought her out for comfort and a maternal figure. He mentions that Daemon was actually after him, that he's flattered that Daemon is intimidated by him, that he regrets killing Lucerys, and that his brother and nephews used to bully him. But what he conspicuously doesn't mention is Jaehaerys himself. He makes for an interesting counterbalance to Aegon in this sense. He's positively emotionless about what just happened to his family, and may have almost happened to him, while Aegon has come completely unglued. Aegon sought some kind of comfort or reassurance from his mother, but Aemond essentially outsources his mother figure and doesn't share his true feelings with his family at all. This speaks directly to the dynamics of the Hightower Targaryen family and Aemond's place in it, as he seems to be someone that nearly everyone in the family can rely on. But to him, that apparently translates to being unable or unwilling to rely on them or expose his true inner self to them in return. He's not unlike Otto and Alicent when it comes to expressing himself, as they are similarly reluctant to share their emotions with others. Or at least, Alicent and Otto try to hide their genuine feelings. However, their feelings usually find their way out one way or another. So, the fact that Aemond still seems so disconnected from himself, even when he's seeking out comfort in someone else, is kind of unsettling. The only time we've really seen Aemond lose control was when he killed Luke, and obviously the results were catastrophic. And it's possible that he simply didn't have enough of a connection to Jaehaerys to warrant an outburst. But it seems more likely that, because he pushes so much of his emotions down and away, he's now a powder keg that is waiting to explode. Emotional maturity clearly isn't something that anyone has come to expect from the characters that inhabit the world of Ice and Fire. But the Hightowers who found themselves up against Rhaenyra and Daemon are an intriguing bunch, in that they seem to genuinely care for each other in a way that many Westerosi families do not. However, they're completely maladjusted and incapable of coping with the trauma that they encounter. It's hard to imagine a tribe who were more prepared for the political machinations that they'd have to pull off in order to emerge victorious in the Dance of the Dragons. But ironically, their greatest downfall likely wasn't their power, their prowess, or their political talents. It was actually their inability to pull themselves together and closer to each other when they really needed to be a family. No one could have reacted to the brutal murder of a child rationally or unemotionally, but Daemon Targaryen's assault on the Greens weakened them in a way that he likely didn't intend or even fully comprehend was possible. Because the true cost of Jaehaerys' death was the collapse of the already shaky psychological foundation that was holding the Hightower Targaryen family together. But what do you think? Will the Greens' inability to connect with each other in the wake of Jaehaerys' murder affect their prospects in the Dance of the Dragons? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.